I'm messaging you from strange times in quarantine in Brooklyn. It's a ghost town right now. Uh, Also, I'm a newly minted father. My daughter, Renata Fry, is not actually able to leave the apartment because babies aren't vaccinated until a few months. And also, on top of that, now the coronavirus is set to clobber the states, so I'm entirely in lockdown. Um, I want to say thank you to my patrons and express concern and thank you to all my friends over in Europe who are getting hit by this thing first. I hope you're all well, and I know that some of you are older than me, and I hope that everyone around you is taking the proper care to make sure that no one gets hurt by this horrible virus. And with that, I'm actually going to talk about the progress because despite all of this stuff, and I'm not sleeping very much because I have a baby and they don't sleep, and we're in quarantine, I'm still working on the game. And so I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to show that. Of course, in expressing thanks to the patrons with names, here's the my new patrons. Welcoming Finn, thank you so much for your support. I'm going to try not to let anybody down and make a very good product. Okay, onto the game here. So one of the main reasons that the Blender game engine was not widely adopted, or it currently is not widely adopted and is now no longer being supported. I hear that the Blender game engine's back, and that's really encouraging. That's great news. I'm really excited by that. This feature is the simple act of being able to mount onto an object or to interact with an object. So when you open a cabinet in a game, pressing a button and then making the cabinet open, that's always been a feature that the Blender game engine could handle aptly, very well. But the problem is when you needed to have a character hold an item or interact with an item that has mesh deformation, for instance, an armature holding an object. If that object did not also have mesh armature deformation, there would be an offset in the animation. And that's just a bug in the Blender game engine. So because I'm left to work with what I have, I've created a workaround where multiple armatures mount onto each other and then calculate their positions remotely, and then they merge the action by playing a simultaneous action on each armature at the same time. So I'm going to show the success first, and then I'm going to get into the technical details to show you all of what's actually happening behind the scenes. So right now, this is the open world running. Also, you can see there's the parallax is now included, and it'll actually include the details of the height map of the ground. So there will actually be distortion in the actual texturing, so you'll get really interesting ground terrain features like that. But I'm going to run inside here very quickly. We're in testing mode right now, so I'm flying around. And you can see this should say press E to interact with window, but right now I'm running out of memory on my computer, so it's showing up as a bunch of blocks. But this should say press E to interact. And as I press E, I will now interact with the window. This opens up and brings the player to a pause state. So all of this actually took a lot of work, and I'm going to show very simply what steps I took to do it. The player is now in a paused state, so they're stuck like that. And then from that state, either the camera will be switched to a hiding inside the closet camera so they can look around, or player control is returned to the player. This depends on the type of object you interact with. So, for instance, if I interact with, say, this cabinet here, I'm going to hide in there. So you can see here's a pair of dummy hands that will actually replace my current hand. So once I hit this to interact, I will be brought to this cupboard and then sucked inside of it. And as I get sucked inside, the camera will switch from the player camera with the control to a dummy camera with hands that will be holding onto the interior of the closet. And you won't notice the switch, but this will make it much easier to apply different kind of camera animation and deactivate physics. Similarly, the interaction with the window over here is doing the same thing, except I'm being sucked to the window. So what that means is essentially if you're far away from a window, like over here, and you want to interact with an item like this, and I press E, I'll get sucked to it, and then the interaction takes place. And that's the big hurdle that I've overcome here. So now this is all programmed in and modular, and now I begin to just slot in each animation for each individual item that can be interacted with. For instance, getting inside the car, getting inside the trunk to hide, hiding under the bed, opening a door, closing a door, blocking the door. So those are the main interactions that I'm going to do for this. And obviously the biggest one, which is the monster grabbing you. So when the monster gets you, you'll be mounted onto an interact bone that the monster also is carrying, and then simultaneous animations will play, and then you'll obviously have a chance to save yourself by holding up the Bible with a crucifix on it, or holy water, depending on the monster. So if you have a stake and you do a killing stroke when the monster has grabbed you, this will result in you staking the monster. So it's kind of like a final chance for you to save yourself kind of end state. So this is what's happening behind the scenes of all of that. It seems like a simple thing to get something to interact, but it's actually pretty complicated. So I'm going to keep it very simple. Basically, this is the body of the player, and the items that the player interact with are armatures. So this is the player armature, but then this is the armature that is being assigned to, let me just get it there. There it is. So this is the armature that is assigned to this window. So you can see this controls the armature of the player, and when you do an animation, it's playing two animations, one for the armature and one for the player. The player is playing the exact same animation as the armature. So when they're both played in unison, you see the player open the window. And that's basically it. But because you're in a world and you need the object to mount onto something, this object here gets lerped to, with math, to this bone right here. And that's when things get a little complicated. So if we go over to the interaction script over here that Tim Krellin first made, it's using a object-oriented system to basically handle that function. So what it's doing is it's running this piece of code here, which is called update grabby, which is just the grabby state. So it updates how you grab the player and how it can be grabbed to things. And there's two states, if it's in its suck-in state or if it's in its sticky track state. So suck-in essentially takes the player properties, which is the start location, the end location, the start rotation, and end rotation, and then lerps the player to that point on the bone, the mount bone, using quadratic easing. So that's what's happening here. So if the grab property is under this number here, so this actually we can change how much it happens. But what it's essentially doing is it's running these three functions here, which is lerping the X, Y, and Z rotation to rotate the camera toward the object that you've just interacted with, and then the location, which is the X, Y, and Z on the location, the world location of that player body, being warped to using quadratic easing once more, and this is the equation right here. So the start world position becomes this location, and then the start world orientation, which of course is up here, the X, Y, Z rotation, is being converted back into a matrix. So it takes the X, Y, and Z, the numbers, X, Y, and Z, in a tuple. 1, 2, 3 coordinates, X, Y, and Z coordinates for rotation. Then once it does this calculation here, these three calculations, it then says, okay, take the world orientation of the start, which is our player body, and then it rotates it towards the mount bone. Well, yes, the orientation is the facing of the object. So that's the world orientation. So it takes the grab property, which is the start rotation, which is the rotation of the object, in this case, start. So you can see up here, the start grab properties is the start world position. And that's being said right here, which says start body, which is self. Oops, I just messed up the code. The self, the body. That's the player body. So once it does this, it will return the suck state of 1, meaning it will no longer suck the player to the mounted bone. And then it says, if that is the case, then we're going to turn everything off. We're going to turn suck in to false. And then it's going to play the appropriate armature action, if there is one. And then obviously the object you've interacted with as well will play its interactive object down here as well. And then all the way up here, we play sticky track. Sticky track is a simplified version of grab. So sticky track simply has the camera and I think I've lost track of her. It's right here. It's just going to take the self body, the entire body, that's world transformations, and it's going to take the target armature world transformations, and then it's going to have it simply track to the pose matrix of the mount bone of the target. So interpolating the player body's position and rotation towards the mount bone is the difficult part. Having it simply track to that bone is very simple. You can see the sticky track is much more simple than the grab. But these two functions here are very valuable because this allows you to have something zoop, kind of warp to an object, and then once it arrives at that object, proceed to play an action. So that's currently the progress that I've made. It seems like it's pretty dry, but what it really means, what it comes down to, is that when you have control in your game environment here, you can simply give yourself, animated doors, interaction, have the player be able to simply mount onto an object, and that's pretty invaluable when it comes to creating a video game. And again, in my opinion, it's one of the main reasons the Blender game engine, it gets dropped by a lot of studios and artists. No one's going to use it because it doesn't have this. So my patrons, I will be making a smaller version of this code. It's already up on my Discord, making it available to you if you want to try and use it and experiment with it. Cleaning this up and using this and streamlining it is going to be really essential if the Blender game engine is going to continue to be used for myself and also other projects. So I'm gonna turn player character physics back on here, and I'm gonna play it here. So let's turn wireframe. I'm gonna turn off wireframe mode here, and I'm gonna play the game. So here's the open world again, and you can see the parallax mapping now. It reveals features based on height displacement that's set by a texture, which means that I can use basically a very simple material shader and then have those material shaders mix with the world. So if, for instance, these leaves will be above certain parts of the grass, and the mixture of those two items will be more or less seamless, and it'll give this impression of tons and tons of detail, when at the same time you're not really actually doing anything that special. It's just the bump. So here you can see the water's actually being mixed based on the height of the world with the water, and that's using the parallax as well. So if I run over to the house here, you can see there's new terrain tiles. These terrain tiles provide greater detail and improved mixture, and that's a very complicated system. If you actually just turn on the physics visualization really quick, you can see that underneath the hood here, it's kind of like the carpet is being pulled out from under you and moved over and over again here. So you can see the little collision meshes for each one. Rather than calculating collision mesh for all the terrain blocks in the game, this single terrain block right here, which is fairly complicated, once I leave this area, the terrain block that is controlling the collision for that will of course be turned off. So as I'm falling through the ground here, but you can see it's all turning off. And in this way, the only time that collision will ever actually be active is near or around the player. And this is essential to get the game to work properly. Without this, you would simply be calculating way too much physics. So you can see over here this hill and all these terrain blocks. Right now, there's lots of physics being calculated in this whole environment here. All that white triangular mesh. It works, but it's not going to be that great for performance because all this physics being calculated over the world is ultimately going to really bog down the performance of the game. So in addition to object lerping and tracking with armatures, this is the other big leap that I've made. This is also going to make the game itself easier for other people to change the modular assets, and you'll be able to simply edit the terrain blocks and move things around. And I'll show a little sample of that first, because we're in lockdown and maybe you have a little bit extra time on your hands. I know I don't, but let's do it anyway. So you can see here the terrain blocks that are currently generated. These are just simple ground terrain blocks that allow you to change the position of things. So you can see the coordinates are set globally, but what it does is it's changing the artifacts, the actual artifact of how much the parallax is mixing with the ground. So it's actually a really cool effect that gives you lots of detail, and you don't need to worry about tons and tons of polygons and all that kind of stuff. It handles everything with a shader. It's a little bit of a secret trick, and it's a little bit of my secret weapon, because once you are far away from the item like this, you can swap out that parallax material with a very simple, just diffuse material with no parallax. So basically, when you're close to an item like this, the parallax will be revealed and seem very complicated and fancy, but when you pull back like this, there'll be a level of detail for that terrain block where only the material will be swapped out for a much lower resolution material, which is going to help lots with performance. That will make the open world work. And of course, just for the last bit here, I'm going to show how easy it is to edit and make terrain tiles. So now, being able to simply move things around like this, you can seamlessly put together the world, and it's all a matter of just creating a variety of terrain tiles. You can see that there's a discrepancy in the normal information here, and that's only when it's being previewed live here. When I jump over here, you can see it goes away, and that's because I'm calculating the global coordinate normals, which is a great way to get around the whole issue. And this way I can seamlessly kind of merge chunks of ground together, and at the same time I don't have to oh, it's over here. You don't need to worry about all the normals and everything like that. You see, it's actually, if they kind of overlap over each other, you can really barely see the difference. And this is actually the secret sauce behind everything. I would call this kind of my ace up my sleeve, is that now that the terrain block system works, this system, the way that it's functioning like this, is very kick-ass, and is it's going to result in an increased number of objects per terrain block. That's granted, but overall this is going to give me a huge benefit in performance and make it work on lower end machines. And that's where I'll end it here. It's a lot of information, and I know I jumped all over the place. Please, everyone, please self-isolate. I'm not really in the crosshairs. I'm 39, but you know, I'm going on 60. But a lot of people here are a lot of the Blender community. I know we're all very careful people. We should all isolate ourselves. I have 4 new grandparents in my family and a kid, and they want to see that kid. So everyone in Europe and America, please, everyone, self-isolate and don't go outside just for a little bit. And hopefully this virus just gets burnt out, or just we come up with a vaccine. Anyway, I'll leave it here. I'm going to not date this talk anymore. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you guys in the next devlog.